Welcome to another edition of Intelligence, bringing you knowledge with the power to change. I'm your host, Brennan Dunn. On tap today, we got a lot of good stuff. We're talking about assisted suicide. We're talking about universal health care. We're talking about paternity fraud, child support issues, and we've got an all-male cast today to talk about it. Not only do we have an all-male cast, we were supposed to have a special guest come in today to talk about their own personal issue with it. However, things happen within the world of newscasting and life. So instead, we have Quentin Broadwater, resident deadbeat to us, to talk about his mechanical engineering outlook on life. We have Damon Parrish, our criminal defense expert. We have Dr. Rod Singleton, our medical expert. And Charles Sherrod Jr., our tech guru extraordinaire. So, fellas, we're going to go ahead and start with, we'll actually highlight a little bit of Rod today for a second. Bernie Sanders, we all know who Bernie Sanders is. He was a one-time presidential candidate, and also he's a congressman who may be running again. But they did a study on his Medicare for All platform and established that it would cost $32.6 trillion over a 10-year period. Now, what they failed to also include in that is the net is actually going to equal out. So there, with all of the accoutrement of the plan itself, even though it'll cost $32.6 trillion over 10 years, when you add in all the subsidies and the payout by the taxpayers coming back to it, it actually evens out and is I believe it was like something close to a $0 balance on that. The question that I have for you guys, because obviously a one payer system where it's universal health care is going to increase our tax dollars. Is it worth it? I mean, this is really one of the crux issues between Democrats and Republicans as far as this, and it marries fiscal plus social issues. What do you think? And then we'll start off with you, Doc.
So I'm all for a single-payer system. So actually, when the PPAC was being passed under Barack Obama's administration, I was kind of jilted at the fact that they kind of came out with this system that had nothing really to do with the single-payer system that I was hoping for. I think it's kind of some misinformation with this new study. It's funded by a conservative think tank, for one. If you look at all the empirical evidence about healthcare costs in the United States as compared to other industrialized nations who have single-payer systems, our costs are astronomical with our current system. And we can only seek to gain provisioning better care for people who don't have access to that right now. I think it's a red herring to talk about the initial cost, because anytime you change a paradigm, you change a system, it's going to be expensive. But as you mentioned earlier, the overall benefit of this is going to be overwhelmingly fiscally responsible. I think I'm one who believes healthcare is a right, not a privilege. And you look at how America, we spend per dollar like about $10,000 per person, which is more than $5,000 more than the average the country that has comparable demographics as us. And so the argument that this will be, the expense is the reason why we should, not try this system is pretty ridiculous.
Now, some people are going to argue, and I don't want to take words out of Damon's mouth because I think Damon sits on the opposite side of that opinion. But I know some people have argued that with a universal health care plan, it takes away competition within healthcare, thus driving down the quality of healthcare. As the resident physician, what's your opinion on that?
So, some things the free market is the optimal system in which like when we talk about technological advancements, stuff like that, you want the free market to dictate that kind of thing, because competition does increase the innovation and product quality, et cetera, et cetera. But with healthcare, I don't think we should be using that kind of logic to deprive people, other human beings, of quality healthcare. I just don't think I don't think this is one of the things we should approach with with fiscal conservatism primarily over humanitarian issues.
All right, Damon, so you've heard the pro. Shoot us the con.
It's not really a con. It's more or less like, your tax dollars, we all complain about taxes. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, no one wants higher taxes. And your tax dollars can go a long way for a lot of things. There's a lot of humanitarian benefit we can raised for. Everybody deserves a place to live. Everybody deserves free education. Everybody deserves health care. You know, at some point, where do you stop and say, okay, here's where it stops? I think there's nothing that capitalism shouldn't drive. I do. I think a competition, to me, brings out the best. And I'm certainly not advocating people die on the street and nothing like that. Something should be done for those that need help, absolutely. But a $32 trillion program is $3.2 trillion a year for one government program. We're not now talking about the military. We're not also talking about any other social service out there. We now have distilled the entirety of the United States budget into healthcare. I don't think that's fiscally responsible.
But you don't think that this is one of those issues where regardless of what kind of taxpayer you are, this is one of those few issues where it touches you no matter who you are, with the exception maybe of like a Jehovah's Witness who says that they don't want to be a part of the healthcare system. But you don't think that paying more, I mean, healthcare expenses are never cheap. I don't know no matter where you go, it's never going to be cheap. So you don't think that the offset of paying a little bit more, a few more dollars in taxpayer money is going to offset me having to go to the hospital and pay $100,000 bill for something that I wouldn't be able to afford? And this isn't just elective things. We're talking about necessary healthcare quality.
So first, let's not trivialize how much you're going to pay in tax dollars. It's not fair to say you're going to pay just a few more dollars versus this $100,000 medical bill you're going to have. You, in one end, minimize the impact of the tax on an individual person, but maximize the benefit on the one person or the persons that will use this healthcare system to its benefit. Now, I think personally, I have no problem with you paying for what you need. I myself have not been to the hospital. I haven't had any massive surgeries. It has not affected me like that. Now, I'm not saying other people should not be denied the same right, but I haven't needed this expansive healthcare system. I might need it one day, right? But I don't need it now. Should I have to pay a large sum of money for the benefit of other people and my future self? I don't think so.
That's the unique thing. That's the unique thing about healthcare, right? Unless you're clairvoyant or you possess some ability I'm not aware of, you don't know when you're going to need healthcare. You don't know. God forbid something did happen to you tomorrow, and you're not prepared to incur those costs. You're going to be in deep shit. And that's the average American who can't afford to manage those situations when they arise. Second off, the whole fiscal argument is fucking ridiculous, right? If you look at the top 10 earning CEOs in America, 3 of them are insurance company or drug company reps, on an average of like $29 million a year in earnings from their companies. When you're talking about the corporation making that kind of profit, the majority of all this cost is on the middleman anyway. It's not the provision of healthcare. It's on the insurance companies. It's on everybody in the middle. It's not the actual provision of care. So that's a red herring. What we're really talking about here is basically an industry that's about to go away or going to take a back seat once that single payer system comes into play. And that's what the real Republican, rebuffing this effort is all about. It's about the money. It's not about the initial cost. It's about who's going to get paid.
Charles, what you got to say, man?
I was just thinking about Damon's argument. I think most of the time, and this is, come from me who's only had to use healthcare, right? I'm not in that business. But most of the time, free market, you would see costs driving down, right? You would see innovation, you would see better care, and you would see the cost of that care going down. You don't see that with healthcare. You see things progressively going up in a way that doesn't really make sense to me, saying that the free market should take care of it. And also, with taxes, I don't feel like we should be able to, in a society that being part of society, you can't always pick and choose something and say, well, if I don't use it, then I shouldn't have to pay for it. I mean, that's good in theory, but, I don't drive on the north side, so my taxes shouldn't go for potholes. Like, when you start getting into that level of detail on taxes, I think you kind of step away, because even if I don't use it, I mean, what about my family members that need it? What about my grandparents? What about people, I've had, my father has had major healthcare needs that, we couldn't have, no matter how much money the family had, without insurance and without some help, we wouldn't have been able to, he may not be alive today. And so, I feel like we need to look at healthcare a little bit different than we do other industries.
And quite honestly, I mean, when you look at, you brought up something with the insurance providers. You literally pay thousands of dollars per year to an insurance provider. And once something happens to you, you are fighting tooth and nail to get the coverage that they have already promised you. Not only that they've promised you, but that you've paid for, up front. I would rather go pay tax dollars to the government without having to fight to get back my reimbursement dollars vis-a-vis taxes than to have to pay it to an insurance provider who I'm going to have to beg, say, please, sir, can you give me some more? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. If I'm going to pay one or the other, why not pay the government, who I know guarantees is going to give me the health care that I need, versus having to beg the insurance company and say, you know what, I've paid you for 4 years now without ever being unhealthy. Can I please get at least half of my insurance bill paid for? I just don't get it.
And you gotta realize, man, when you say free market, man, you gotta understand the free market is for profit. So when you say it creates competition and all that, you're not really doing that, because at the end of the day, like Rod mentioned earlier, the goal is for these guys to maximize their profits, and they're going to do it at whatever cost they need to do. Right.
So Janice, one of our viewers, Janice, she commented saying that people should make better choices. She's clearly one of those of the belief that most of people's issues come from personal decisions, and she's an accountability type of person. But I don't think with healthcare that it incentivizes these businesses to do the best for their patients. I think every year, like any other corporation, they're fighting to find novel ways to create more profit, and that's just not a model that's workable for healthcare.
Yeah, and actually, to Janice's point, I was actually just going to make a point. I think if we had some type of universal healthcare system, there wouldn't be such a push by these drug companies and insurance companies for certain treatments versus trying to help people do some things that may keep them out of the hospital, right? Because we know the business, the money is not in preventing you from going in the hospital, it's from treating you once you get there. So
but the problem I'm having with all y'all's arguments is that you have now in this stroke, opposite to what we usually do, you've glorified the government, and you've said now the government now has the ability to manage money properly, manage healthcare properly, and create a system that works beautiful for everybody, and that now a market-driven industry is no longer good. I get that this is driven by the need for health, and I'm not opposed to people being healthy. All right, but to now put all your faith in the government and say, hey, government's good for us, in this one instance, take all my money, because we know you're going to be responsible, and I know you're going to help me out in the front end, and I know, government, you're going to take care of me, big brother. Do what you got to do for me. We don't have an idea of what an actual universal healthcare system in America would look like, on how it would work, and it would actually be to the benefit that you say it would. We don't have that. You say you've got extrapolations from other countries, and for every one you give me that works, I give you one that doesn't. So you want to give me Europe, I give you Venezuela. You want to give me other parts of Europe, I give you Russia. They have universal healthcare system, and it all fails. Well, that system and that government.
You were a genius with that comment, Damon, because you knew we were going to wrap up on this segment. So we can't, in good conscience, keep going on it. But we will be doing some blogs about that, so stay tuned for the blogs. And please, questions, comments, and concerns so we can address those on the blog. We're going to roll over to international news. France has just banned smartphones in schools for ages 3 to 15. It's pretty interesting. I think their whole issue is children need to be focused in school, and smartphones are a deterrence to that focus in school. Is that something that the U.S. needs to be looking at, or are smartphones so inextricably intertwined within our lives that it's almost nigh on impossible to live life without it?
I believe, man, easy way to probably look at that is to where do we rank in comparison to schools that countries that ban it. That's one way to look at it, and you could probably get a quick answer from that. But
we're at the bottom of the barrel now. Well, not at the bottom of but we've gone from one of the top educational programs down to middle of the road at best.
So we've fell far. But I don't know, me having an engineering background and thing, that's a dangerous thing to do, because if you have a smartphone, you have access to information very quickly, right? So what most people are going to do, instead of trying to figure out what's going on and really learn what they're supposed to be learning, they're going to use their smartphone to get through it. So I think we should ban that. I think we should ban smartphone usage in schools and make kids go to school and actually learn and apply what they're learning.
All right, what's up, Mr. Tech?
Wow. So I kind of agree with it. I think many schools now have some type of protocol for kids using phones in school. So in America, because of, unfortunately, some of the danger that goes on around our schools, you may see parents kind of have a backlash because they want to have that electronic leash for their kid to contact them if something goes wrong with all these shootings and stuff like that. But if we're just talking about learning, I think at that age, and even at any age, right, we find a lot of people, I found myself almost addicted to just going to the phone for certain things. And, you know, if you got kids texting, looking at social media, looking at all these things that become social currency, I think it detracts from the learning process. And I agree with Quentin. There is something to be said for having access to information. There's more to be said to being educated and learning how to think and how to process things and how to solve problems without being able to immediately go to Google and find the answer, because we got to a point where you don't need to learn anything. You don't need to know anything. You just need to know how to look something up. Yeah. And that's, in my opinion, that's not a good thing.
Well, you brought up a good point, and I'm going to have Rod, you can kind of answer this with your response on it. You brought up something saying that, you know, we use tech for everything now. The way we learn, we've gone from simply writing out a math equation to using the TI instrument to now kind of almost it's instantaneous. The answers are at our fingertips. Do we really need to go backwards with technology in terms of education, or do we actually need to utilize the technology as it's given to us and have that be our new benchmark for the next evolution of learning? Go ahead, Rod.
It depends on how ubiquitous the technology that you're proposing we should adopt versus abandoning the fundamental education, right? And whether that technology is going to persist. That would be the difference between me supporting a more traditional education that established the fundamentals of, you know, doing arithmetic versus using a calculator. If every kid in 10 years has a calculator on their hip, and, you know, we're pretty sure that we're not going to regress technologically in society and we won't ever have to utilize those skills, then I would be all for it. But I think there is some value in the process of learning some of those fundamental skills. And to go back to what he said, I don't think this is a novel idea in kind, right? Because for a while now, we've had different initiatives to try to reduce the amount of distractions in classroom. I know when I was coming up, certain schools would have dress codes so that kids would be more focused on more important things than what they have on and that kind of stuff. So I think it's just a modern iteration of that kind of pursuit.
All right, sound off on your last thoughts on the show.
Yeah, last point is anybody who's ever done any coding, working on computers, working on calculators or anything like that, you know, it's not just the machine, right? You have to know, you have to have some knowledge, because you can code something improperly. You can do something with the wrong syntax. If you don't learn how to think things through and see that something, even if the computer says this is what it should be, that's not the right answer, then you're in for big problems down the road.
All right, well, we're gonna probably bring some teachers on in some subsequent episodes so we can talk about this education issue. But we want to move forward because we got some pretty interesting things to talk about. The next thing up on the list, over there in California, a Palo Verde Estates man was acquitted this last Monday on charges of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder in connection with a fatal shooting of a 21-year-old man in South LA last year. Cameron Terrell, 18-year-old white boy, was acquitted in connection with being involved in gang activity, which led to the death of this young man. What's interesting about it is he was lauded as the getaway driver in this particular case. There are photos with him with one of the gangs. I think this was a Crip gang. Yeah, so this is a Crip gang. He's wearing all this stuff. His defense attorney, you know, as Rod has said before, you can't be mad at lawyers for doing their job. His defense attorney argued that, hey, he wasn't a gang member. He simply was interested in what gang life was all about. And when the guys who actually did the shooting jumped back in the car, his defense was, well, I didn't know what was going on. I was just driving because I was scared. They jumped back in the car and we ran away. And some might say, well, he didn't actually do the shooting, so of course he would be not guilty. However, there is this thing called a law of parties, which says that if you assist in the commission of a crime, then guess what? You are just as guilty as the shooter, no matter what small role you played in it, as long as you assisted in the crime. So, for all intents and purposes, he could have been found guilty of murder. This is one of those instances where it's almost a mixture of cultural appropriation mixed with racial discrimination, mixed with an unfair and disparate justice system. Now, Damon, you're looking at me quizzically, so go ahead.
I'm just curious about the cultural appropriation part. Where does that come in?
I'm glad you asked. I'm talking about the ability for this white boy to come in and take on the persona of a Crip member, but without actually ever saying, you know what, I'm not gonna really be a Crip member. Let me just touch on this blood and Crip thing. Oh, that's real cute. Yeah. Now I want to be a part of it, but I don't want to be a part of it. It's almost like that term. Everybody want to be a nigga, but don't nobody want to be a nigga.
It's time to be
So the knee-jerk reaction to this, I'm sure by your commentary as well, is that this is more of a racial thing, right? For me, reflexively, I was like, oh, this is the same old shit, right? But this to me is more of a socioeconomic disparity than it is a racial disparity, a la O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson had the resources to mount a credible defense, a pretty creative defense, and he got off of what we know was he was obviously guilty in that situation. In this particular circumstance, yeah, right.
He was guilty.
So this is about the ability to mobilize resources and get a credible defense in an adversarial justice system. This is not. I don't think this is more so about race. It is ridiculous. I mean, clearly this guy was a member of a gang. He was in rap videos. He wore colors. He threw up gang signs. He had affiliations. He was the getaway driver. I know at least in South Carolina under the felony murder clause, it doesn't matter what the intent was. If you were a member of that party, you were involved in any kind of illegal activity, then you assume the murder charge like everyone else. So I don't think this is more of a racial thing. It is a socioeconomic.
I gotta disagree with you, and the reason why I disagree with you, there is indeed a component of this of socioeconomics, because this man he came from a millionaire household. Yes. His house was worth I think $2 million house. Yes. He made $5 million bond. However, when the racial tones of this are exponentially visible when you talk about his ability to use that particular defense in this case. If this was a black boy saying, I just wanted to see how the Crip life worked, a jury's going to look at you and say, come on now, you just wanted to see, you weren't really a part of it. He gets the benefit of the doubt because of his skin color on this virtuoso attempt to say, hey man, I'm there, but I'm not with. And I think that's where the racial intonation comes in.
No doubt there's a racial component, but you think if this was a white boy from abject poverty, that he would have the same defense?
I think he would certainly be more inclined to have that defense be utilized for him than any other black boy or Hispanic boy.
So you think a black kid with similar means and access to the type of representation he had would not fare? There's no possibility he would fare as good enough.
No, it doesn't matter.
So back to the OJ then. Explain the OJ Simpson verdict then. What was that based on?
That was still based.
OJ didn't do it.
Because I mean,
y'all need to start trying to sell OJ out, man.
Let me say this. I do agree with you. It's not just about race in every case, and if you have access to money to have the best lawyers, that does give you a leg up. The reason I say if this was a black person or a young black man from the same type of household as this young man with the same type of means, he might be able to put on that defense. But would he be found? Would he be found not guilty? And it wouldn't work. To quote, the great movie A Time to Kill. Imagine if he's black. Imagine if that kid was black, because in the minds of most juries and a lot of those judges, if you say gang member, what do you think? Who do you see?
Young black boy.
Who do you see when you say gang member? And so who do you not see when you say gang member? Because you dress this kid up, you bring him in, you talk about the home he's from, you show his home, his family, where he's from, and then you say there's no possible way that this is a gang member, and the people will believe you, because when you say gang member, that's not who they see.
You're going to be guilty by association just because you black man. Yeah, if me and you leave right here, right now, and I go down the street and I bust somebody in the head with a brick and you with me, you going go down with me just because you with me.
Y'all preaching to the choir.
As a lawyer, I'll say the failure in this is not in society, but in my opinion, the prosecutors. Because you're right. They may have had a burden to overcome with the fact that that this young man pretended to be what he actually was, which was in a gang. But that was their burden. And they should have stepped up and showed to him. They should have showed the juries who this man really is. And that he may have once lived in Bel Air, but now he perpetrates to being someplace else where he's in the gang, in the Crip, and whatnot. If as a defense attorney, I'll tell you right now, sometimes you have to create defenses. All right? And sometimes you create defenses you don't quite believe in because your clients won't plead. And you go to trial with the best you got. And when you have the money and the means and the imagination, you can do some stuff with it. But it's if that failure of that conviction, in my opinion, rests upon the DA's office, more so than society.
All right, well, we're about to get into the more interesting stuff of the night, the things that probably our Facebook users have been waiting on and was going to probably take us a good long amount of time to discuss. We'll start with a combination of the guest that was supposed to be here, Mr. Cornejo. I think that's how you say it. Cornejo. Gabriel Cornejo. This was a guy who was ordered by the court to pay almost $65,000 in arrears in child support. What happened in this case was got jiggy with a girl. 16 years later, she comes back and says, hey, you know what? You got a baby by me and you need to pay up. He's like, well, damn. She goes in, gets a default judgment against him for arrears. $65,000 worth of arrears given a default judgment, which means that he never filed an answer. He never actually defended himself in this suit. We fast forward. He takes a DNA test. Lo and behold, it's actually not his baby. So he's now fighting the system to not have to pay those arrears back. A lot of people are up in arms about that because and he ended up actually walking from Houston to Austin in protest of the Texas child support laws in this manner. And it's sad, Damon, that we have to adhere to a law that ostensibly says, even if it's not your child, once there is an order put in place for you to pay, you got to pay, regardless of anything else.
Yeah. So the Texas child support laws are, in my opinion, extremely toxic. There are aspects of it that make sense, and it's one of those arguments that people have that, take care of your children. How can you fight with that? Kind of like universal health care. Take care of your children, right?
Shade.
I see what you did.
not even close to the same thing.
But very much. But it creates a situation where you have this young man, or maybe he's an old man now, that was put in a situation that's not fair. But what I want to mention on him is that he could have avoided that. So the process of what happened was he got served and did not respond. He got served with paperwork that said, come to court, you were being sued for child support. Now, you don't just get a default. Somebody just doesn't walk down to court and default you. You have to get served. You get a time period to answer. And if you don't answer, pop goes your default. Now, I understand that he did not.
It was actually sent to
an
address that he that he no longer lived at.
However, it's sent to his last known address, meaning the address he had on his driver's license or his government paperwork that said, I live here, it was sent there. There's a reason why they do that, because you're telling everybody in the world, this is where I live. I know it sucks being sued. I'm a lawyer. I've sued people. I've seen their responses. Update your address. At some point, there is personal responsibility here. Make sure your affairs are ordered. Had he gotten proper service, meaning had his correct address, he would have went to court. He would have said, that ain't my baby, got his DNA test, and he would have avoided the quagmire he's in right now.
Yeah, that's all nice and cool.
I mean, no,
but there's still a matter of the practical wrongness of this particular type of law, where no matter what it is,
it's only wrong because he defaulted.
No, it's still a wrong. It's still an erroneous law. You're telling me that if you're talking about a guy who doesn't have a child that's not his child, but he still has to pay arrears on a child. I mean, this is egregious.
Had he followed his service, he wouldn't have got the order in the first place. That's all I'm saying. It is toxic. It is wrong. But I'm not going to sit here and say this man is without any and all fault. He played a part in this by allowing this default to happen.
But when laws cease to work to the ends of its legislative intent, which is to care for a child, which you have a responsibility to care for, it's a moot point to say that he didn't follow legal procedures after they've established that it's not his child, and now he's beholden to arrears from a technicality. That is the consummate technicality. Like, I mean, come on, I see what you're arguing from a lawyer standpoint, from a procedural standpoint, but from a moral standpoint. And we know that morality gets conflated with legality, right?
Right.
So in this particular case, it's not morally right for this man to be paying arrears for a child that he did not father.
Regardless of what mistake he made.
I agree. That's toxic part. I agree with that. What I'm saying is he bears responsibility. I'm not going to make this man not
but if that responsibility deserve that.
Of course not.
It's not commensurate with the oversight, though.
It never is, though. Like, whether you pay $0 or $1 million for something that's not your responsibility, it's never fair. Yeah, but I'm saying let's not make this man out to be an angel.
Let's take the next step, because let's go back to the law, right? When he did take steps, when he got his DNA test to prove that he wasn't that child's father, he was still caught up in the system. Like, there should be some remedy quickly. There should be some remedy quickly in that case. Like, there is nothing that should take that long to try and figure out and say, not even to stop it or pause it, but to say, well, too bad. You should have answered that. You should have answered at the appointed time. Like that's idiotic to me. That's crazy.
All right, we're about to get even more in depth in this child support issue. I feel like all these avid watchers right now about to really blow up as we have this part of the discussion. Recently, your boy Blake Griffin, basketball player extraordinaire, was just in the news. Originally, it was reported that his the mother of his two children, Cameron Bryn, was given an allocation of $258,000 a month in child support, which would have equated to $3 million a year, which would have equated to about 9% of his total income. However, that story has been retracted. Its actually accurate amount is $32,000 a month for those children, which comes out to roughly about $285,000 a year. On top of that, Miss Bryn already had a child from football player Matt Leinart. He's a quarterback in the NFL, and that totaled, I think it was $15,000 a month. So she's getting roughly about $47,000 per month in child support for 3 children from 2 fathers. There's been a lot of discussion back and forth about yay or nay to that kind of payment for a child. Many of the women on this issue have said, hey, look, you should have known better. You got to pay what you owe. And on top of that, that's just a drop in the bucket in terms of monetary value when he's making $20-some-odd million a year. What's a couple $100,000, or in the case where it would have been originally, as we originally thought, what's $3 million when that's only 9% of your income? And Rod, you actually talked about this and you mirrored something that was in my thought. So because you said it first, I'll let you go ahead and speak on it because I don't want you arguing me down, telling me how I stole your thunder. So go ahead.
Because you do that.
Get them right.
So everyone who knows me knows I feel strongly about this situation. I think the child support system as currently constituted is a racket. I think it's a government kickback scheme. I think it needs to be abrogated and completely changed. The system needs to be completely changed.
If it's a racket, who benefits from it?
So the state gets so brought up by one of my new nomad friends. I can't remember his name, but I went and fact checked Kevin Plowden. Kevin put me on some real useful information. I went back and checked the Department of Child Support Enforcement website. On the federal level, it shows data about how much money the states earn as revenue based on fees they take from child support payments. Texas being probably the biggest profiteer in the 60s of millions a year. So there's incentive to maintain this system, albeit very draconian and outmoded and outdated, into place because there are people who are benefiting like anything else in capitalism. Now, I'll say this. This debate always starts off with red herrings, right? I don't think we will find any disagreement with any man on the planet that supporting your child financially is something that you're incumbent to do. That is not what child support. That's not what the decry from child support is about. It's about the fact that these awards are not fair. They do not reflect the legislative intent, which states that this is to provide financial assistance for a child that you have fathered. More so, it seems to be more punitive. That they come up with all these ancillary arguments about the child should be living the lifestyle of the father, or because they're affluent, the percentage that they're paying is a modicum of their income. This has nothing to do with the intent of the law. And I think that's what a lot of this support of the child support system is predicated on. But we can get more into it.
And to add to what you said, Chuck, Rod, I'm sorry. In Texas, the money comes in not in the child support payments, but the amidst payments, the arrears, because those get taxed at 6% per annual interest a year, and all that interest goes to the state. So a person can receive a retroactive child support award of $30,000, and then they will tell them, hey, of that $30,000, $18,000 is interest. You think you're about to get $30,000. In reality, you're about to get $12,000, because that $18,000 in interest goes to the state. That's across the board in every state in this country. In some countries, states, I think South Carolina has a 12% per annual. Because I had a case like that once to one of my clients. That's the racket part. That part sucks because now you're taxing people who can't pay with an additional amount on top of the arrears. So they have the child support, and if they mess up, the arrears support, which includes interest. And you can't pay, and then you can put them in jail. There's 180 days in custody for missing payments, and it's all based on this 20%, 25% idea of what you should pay that was not based on economics. like the government just created a figure and say, you know what, you should pay 20% of your debt, and that's what it is. No, there was no studies done into why 20% as opposed to 18 or 12, why 25%. They just picked the number, and without studying its actual impact upon people, you create a very toxic environment.
My only issue, Rod, with what you said was that use of the term punitive in nature, child support being punitive. I mean, let's be completely honest and real here. It's child support as an entity is not a punitive procedure. And maybe you did, but I didn't hear that come through. So I want people to understand that that's...
They heard it.
Okay, well...
You didn't hear it.
I try to tune you out sometimes.
I said that no one disagrees that the ostensible the reason for child support is to support your child, and no one disagrees with that. Okay. But I said instead of being compensatory, it is... the way it is established, punitive in certain regards.
What do you mean the way it's established? Maybe that's the problem that I have.
The way the laws are promulgated, the way the policies are dictated to that mandate the father pay. Like, again, with this Blake Griffin thing being like the catalyst of this conversation, how much does a child really need to be supported? How can a child, all the viewers out there, I want you guys to come on our Facebook page and itemize all the ways you think a child can live the lifestyle of his father. I mean, are we going to buy the child Bentley strollers, Givenchy diapers, platinum? They're going to drink premium milk. Like it's a fallacious argument that has traction, but no one questions it.
Well, I think you got to be careful with that though, because I mean, come on, man. This man make $20 million a year. How much money do you think the child should have? It's not about buying a child expensive shoes, diapers, clothing, and all that, but it's more so you got to think about the future of the child, right?
So how much does the future cost?
Well, hold on. We're going to come back. I'm going to Charles and I'm going to actually answer that.
Because I'm a little bit... So here's the thing. Number one, you're talking, and we talk about, I agree with you that there's a racket that the state and other states do, especially with charging interest on the arrears. But you're talking about two people who can't agree on how to live together, right? Mm-hmm. They have children. Somebody has to make sure that these children are provided for in a way that, lives up to some kind of standard. And when men say things like, well, how much money does it take to take care of a child? A lot. It takes a lot of money to take care of a child. If you are a parent who wants to give, because money, it's not about the things that money can buy. It's about the options that money gives you. It's about the security that money gives you. It's about whether or not you want to, certain private tutors. Schools. If you're going to have tutors, if you're going to have private schools, if you're going to live in a certain neighborhood, the neighborhood that you would want your child to live in, and you can't always be the one to make that choice. That's the thing. If you're not, now I also think it's a racket about a woman always being the default custodian.
Let's stay on this particular.
I do think child support should be, when they talk about lifestyle, right? Mm-hmm. When I was paying child support at one time, I got custody and I wasn't paying child support. At both times, I always tried to make it a point that my children were living as I live, right? So the things that I have, the access that I have, the places that I can go, whether or not it was at that level. Now, they're not going to go out and eat at the same restaurants as me because they're kids. They want nuggets or whatever they want. But it's also making sure that they have access to the same things. If I'm taking a trip every year that we would normally take as a family, now, unfortunately, they're going to have to take that trip maybe without me, but they're still going to be able to take that trip. When they get to college, when they get to a college age, having the savings, when it's time for them to have a car, all of the things that would normally happen if they were living in a house with me, I want to make sure that happens with or without me. Go ahead.
So it's interesting. Hold on. It's because both of you have kind of mirrored Quentin and Charles, the same issue of what the child could get with this parent. My issue with that type of sentiment, and let me, before I go into what I'm saying, Candace Jackson says, she says a couple things. First thing she says is child support is to level out the household that would have been had the father remained in the household. The second thing is, I hate that mindset. How much does it take to raise a child? And Tiffany Milton.
I agree with her.
So she had two things. So here's my take on that. First of all, child support is actually for the support of the child. It's not to make sure that you had the same lifestyle that you would have had with that particular parent. Because hold on, you actually can't, because what that presupposes is that your child is entitled to your money, and your child is never legally entitled to your money because you have the legal ability to write your child out of your will, which means that you have the legal ability at any point in that child's life, once you have left this world, to give your child absolutely nothing. And on top of that, you as a parent have the ability to decide and have the discretion to decide what your child gets while they live with you. So if I'm the father or the mother in the situation, you can't presuppose how I would have raised my child simply because that child is no longer living in my household. Because when you talk about certain things, I mean, this is, first of all, let's put this in the vacuum of Blake Griffin. We're talking about now because there's a difference. We have to also understand there's a difference between multimillionaire parents and your run-of-the-mill $30, $50, $60, $100,000 parents. So there's a whole different playing field. But when you talk about the Blake Griffins of the world, $32,000 for 2 children. So let's divide that, $16,000 per child. First, let's think about this first. This is a baby. This isn't a child that needs to go to private school right now. This isn't a child that has to go run track, go play soccer, has to go do all the things that a 13, 14, a 16-year-old would do. So you minimize the amount of actual support that's needed from that child, because at this point, they need a titty and a roof. And maybe some diapers if you don't want it naked.
But here's the thing. This is the thing that people do. That's not for you to decide if you're not.
Neither for a judge.
But here it is. Because I've been the non-custodial parent and I've been the custodial parent. And when I was the custodial parent, it was not for somebody else to decide what things my children had access to, what things I wanted to give them, how I wanted to take the money that I was given.
You're half of that child, because you got to remember there's another parent that's engaged in that.
There's agreements to be made, but again, to my very first point, when you take two people who can't even agree how they're going to live together, they're not going to agree, because you have, now, all of us are probably reasonable people who, those of us who have kids, we give the world for our kids. We're not going to spoil them. We're not going to do things in a different way. But there are some people who say, and I know a lot of them who say, once I leave that house, y'all got to figure it out. And that's the problem you have, because you can't get into a situation where you let two people who can't even decide what to do with a child figure out how much money they're going to give, because you do have that situation. Listen, I paid a lot in child support, and that was my mindset too.
But that's the thing about it. It's only,
why do you need all this money?
It really only penalizes the men who actually pay. It's not like these exorbitant child support awards are going to impact the guys who are not willing to take care of their kids. The system itself victimizes the people who actually take care of their kids.
Yeah, but you have to have a way to find a happy, not a happy medium.
We're talking about
but
the happy
some
medium.
Standard. Now, does the system need to be readjusted and looked at? Yeah. Do they need to do studies to figure out, what kind of lifestyle their kid would have if you two were together and really have a real number? Yes. But you can't take away the need for there to be some baseline level.
No one here is arguing that.
So what would the baseline level be?
That is the question we need to address on the legal and on a social level. Okay. We need to find out how much a child needs to survive. How much you need to support a child.
But it differs.
It does differ, but we should find a way to do that.
I mean, I think about my children.
So you're preferential to an arbitrary system rather than one that we doing.
But I'm saying people, when people can't decide. When I think about my children, right? If I think about my children versus the children of some of my friends, even at the same income level, the things that I choose to do for my children, the lifestyle that they live, based on the money that I give them, is totally different than somebody else.
Right. So here's my thing. You okay with the judge being the arbiter of how much I should pay what amenities I should provide my child with? I wrote something earlier on our blog talking about my father. My father, in my mind, is an MVP. He's an MVP father. My father raised me right. My father didn't give me a decent car when I came up. He gave me a shitty Taurus. He was driving a nice car. He didn't recapitulate his wardrobe for me. He made me go get a job. He didn't give me money. He had the means to do that, but he had the decision as a father. He had the autonomy to say, I don't want to give my child that type of lifestyle, even though I can. Right. So why is it that you're okay with a judge arbitrarily going into
I'm not saying I'm okay with it. I'm saying that
of that lifestyle. It's not saying that the judge is saying you have to go buy this car or buy those clothes. He's saying this if you make $20 million a year, you need to provide the gateway for your child.
So how much does the gateway cost? Practically speaking, does my child need $3 million?
Wait. What do you mean by? Hold on. Before I want to understand what you mean by you have to provide a gateway for your child.
If I make $20 million a year and I say, okay, well, this child only needs $500 a year, what is that based on? That's just based on it could in more cases than none. It's probably based on the fact the relationship that I have with the child's mother, the bitterness between the two parents. Because if I make $20 million a year, there's no way you could sit here and say, as a loving father or somebody who wants to pave the future for your child, that you can only get them $500.
So you can say that money's not going to my child, but it's supporting the lifestyle of your failed relationship partner.
It does. That's what you can say.
But let me say this, because lawyers in the room tell me this, right? It's not determined that you have to use the child support system, right? If the two people can make an agreement outside of the court, if you can sit down with the mother of your children and say, you know what, this is how much I make. I make $20 million a year. I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z for you, right? You two adults can sit down and make an agreement that has nothing to do with the courts. Am I correct in saying that?
You're right.
But am I correct in saying that?
Yes, you're right.
And the reason that you have these situations is because exactly what I say. Two people can't sit down because the person who has the most money
wants to control the situation. And the other person, they're going to use the child to try to control the situation.
Here's part of the problem,
I think Brendan said it right, and I agree completely. You want to give your kids the best, but you don't have to provide a gateway to this opportune lifestyle that $20 million buy. You take care of your kids, and if you love love your kids, you will give them the best. There is no question about that. And if you take care of your kids, regardless of the situation, you would give it your best. Now, I do believe you should take care of your children. I am not advocating not taking care of your kids. But there has to be a better, sensible approach. And by saying kids deserve things, that's creating a situation that's...
Before we wrap up, I just want to say one thing. That's why there has to be a dispassionate third party helping to make these decisions. Because just the four of us who are pretty much... We got very similar backgrounds and similar ideas. We can't even decide between us what would be a proper level to give your kid. If we all made $20 million a year... How Rod would raise his child, and I would raise my child, and Damon would raise his child would be completely different.
I think part of the problem is the actual term child support. And I think that's where we run into the roadblock, because what Quentin said brings up a differentiation in monetary value. There's a difference between the amount of money it takes to support a child and the amount of money it takes to make the child fit whatever lifestyle you want that child to have. Because when you talk about support, when you talk about support, you can actually, and somebody said on here earlier, something about you can't. Jonae Paris said you can't arbitrarily quantify how much a child costs. You can't arbitrarily do it, but you can actually monetize the cost, the bare bones cost of what it takes to what it takes to actually fund a child. There are diapers. There are tangible things that are needed monetarily in order to support a child, versus what you're talking about, which is out of the love of my heart, how much do I want to give to my child's future? How much of my income wants to be there to support the lifestyle? There's a difference between support and lifestyle. And what child support means is how much money should it take to actually make sure that child can function healthily in society, versus what we're all talking about, which is how much should a person give to their child based off of their income, because this is the child that is the progeny of their fruits of labor. Go ahead, Charles.
This way, because here's why people that say that are full of shit. Because, and let's take away the $20 million a year. Let's get down to the normal people that
get down to the money we deal with
deal with every day. When people say, "Oh, you only need so much to support a child," if you ain't never been in a house broke with a kid, where you're not doing well, where your mental stability is not right because you don't have the money to do the things that to provide for that child in a way that you feel like that child should have, when your house is not right, when your car is not right, when you're working two jobs, when you hustling on the side to make sure that they can do all that extracurricular activity,
emotional appeal,
all of that stuff has something to do with the way your child is raised, because that goes to the health and welfare of your child. Just because you got enough money to take care of the things that child needs and you can't take care of yourself, and I'm not caping. Like I said, I went and got custody of my children because, some things that I felt that are personal, but I had to do that because I felt that the lifestyle that they needed to be living was with me. So I'm not saying that, I'm not caping for the woman. I'm saying anybody who's a custodial parent, if you've ever been in a situation where you didn't have enough, but you had enough just to take care of the kids, but not your own mental health, that affects your children too. Don't think it doesn't just because you say, oh, well, they have enough to get lunch this week. That's bullshit.
So Candace Battle asked the question, which actually piggybacks into our next part of this discussion, which is, can we start promoting joint custody? Would that take care of this child support issue? The answer would be yes, because a true 50-50 split would equate to no child support being done, because the child goes 50%. Child support is predicated on how much time is spent with each parent. Anytime it's more than 50%, if it's 51 to 49, you get child support in that case. If it's 50-50, generally speaking, you have a even split of time, which means that there's no one parent who has more of a financial responsibility, in theory, for that child. Now,
That's not true, because
I said in theory, which is terms of visitation versus support. But the question that Candace has brings us into the thought process and the ideology of the deadbeat dad. Deadbeat dads being, and I hate that it's only coined for fathers, but I guess in truth, men are more likely to be the deadbeat than the woman. So we have to accept and own that truth as men in this society. That it may not apply to every man. Obviously, fellas, it may not apply to every man, but generally speaking, it is more likely than not that it will apply to a man than a woman. Now, that being said, this thing about deadbeat dads, I think there's only been 2 times. I used to wonder, how does one become a dad? Like, how do you get to the point where you don't want to be around your own child, or you have nothing to do with your own child? I come from a family where my father was not around. And I always wondered, man, how does one get there? And I think I finally saw it in one of my friends growing up, where I knew both parents. I knew mom and dad. We were all the same age. They ended up getting pregnant together. Mom ended up taking care of the child while dad kind of just slid back on responsibility. That embittered mom. She became frustrated, and it became a cycle of activity where she was trying to get him to take up the financial responsibility. He didn't want it. And as a part of that, not wanting the financial responsibility, he starts to edge away from his actual interaction with the child. I think that deadbeat dads come from 2 different scenarios. The first scenario being the man or woman who does not want to accept financial responsibility in the manner that has been set forth, and so they equate money with visibility. If I'm not paying, if I don't want to pay, then I really have not invested in this child, so I really don't want to be around the child. The second part of that is, or the iteration of that is when a parent uses a child as a weapon and a tool, either just out of pure animosity towards the person, or as a tool to get the money that they were supposed to get in child support. And when that parent starts to use that child, the parent who has the visitation rights or custody rights to the child starts to use that weaponry of the child, the other parent is then turned off and says, look, it's not worth fighting you over to try to see my own child. So they lose interest in the fight itself, which means that the only person that suffers is the child because of the weaponry, because of the child being weaponized. What are your thoughts, fellas?
I say on this right here, man, like Charles mentioned earlier when we were talking, I don't think the child support has to be there, man. The child support has to be there. I don't believe the deadbeat dad theory is as strong as we make it to believe, because financially, yes. If you're not taking care of your kids financially, then yes, you are a deadbeat parent. And we need to stop saying deadbeat dad, because just because somebody's in the house with a child doesn't mean that they're not a deadbeat parent themselves. It's more than financial responsibility, man.
But you just said financial.
I'm saying that's a component of it, Rod. I'm not saying that's the only thing. That's a component of it.
I'm just making you clarify what you said, because you on one hand said if you're not paying, then you're a deadbeat parent, and then you turn around and say finance is not the only thing. So you kind of can you clarify?
I'm saying that's a component of it. There's a full circle to raising a child, man.
Yeah.
There's time, there's emotional
I get that, but
input
that's
into
not what you
that,
said.
and there's finances in there. So we can't just, anytime you hear deadbeat parent, what people are referring to is the fact that there's finances absent from somebody coming into the house.
Not always. I know people who refer to a
that
deadbeat
is-
father because of a presence as well.
Yeah.
But they are provided.
That is, but what is the number one reason that people call somebody a
Anecdotally, it
deadbeat
is
parent?
about financial support. But I want
Exactly.
you, but what you said, you kind of contradicted yourself. I just wanted to be clear on that. I'm not arguing with the premise of what you
I
said.
didn't contradict myself. It is a component of the entire piece of the pie. It's a component of it. So, but anyway, man, we got to stop focusing so much on that and focus on how do we get to that, because I feel like the number one problem is how people get awarded custody of kids. Man, if you want to buy a house, man, you got to give them your social security, you got to give them everything. A card. It's so easy to go get custody of a child. Just go to the courts and complain. You go through a
What?
quick.
That's
not
It is.
objection.
It is harder to get a house than it is to get custody of a damn child.
You said-
wait, wait,
if you're
harder?
a woman. If you're a woman. Now, a man goes through hell.
Oh, I
You
thought
should have said,
you
you
should have
should
said
have
that.
led with that, son.
Sir, it don't matter if I lay with it or not. That is the truth.
What is the reason why
First
we
of all,
all
who are you yelling
misunderstood you?
at?
No, you're not listening.
We
You're
all
not listening.
misunderstood.
Listen to what I'm saying.
You're getting real breasty
It is
right
so
about now.
easy. It is so. Think about it like this. If it was a 50% chance that you're going to win or lose, how many women do you think would run to the courts and say, "I want custody of this child"? But because it's a 90-something% chance, it's easy for you to go into a courtroom and say, "I don't want to be with this man no more. I want to put him on child support."
And you're talking about
Well,
specifically
so-
the woman, right?
Okay.
When we're talking about the ease of getting
The
a
ease
child,
of
we're
getting
talking
a
about
child
specifically.
and putting somebody on child support and having that system and having somebody put into the system.
Let me address.
Hold on. Let's be fair. Quitting to answer your question there. That ease you talk about is usually because that custodial parent has had the child
Is it?
by themselves. I'm
No,
not
it's
saying
not.
every stretch of the imagination,
No,
but
it's
by
not.
themselves. If you're in a situation where your child has lived with one parent the entirety of it, or you're in a marriage
That's not
and
true, Damon.
one party leaves, I've lived it myself as a child, and
I've lived it and gone through
when
it.
I did family law, this is what I saw. I can only speak anecdotally of my life.
But what
as
about-
well as
what
my
about
practice.
all of
Hold
the
on. Hold on,
divorces
Brennan,
that
hold on
are
now.
part of that?
So I'm not. I will agree with you. There's a bias in the courts towards women. Absolutely, nobody can deny that. Definitely a bias, but I don't think that to say that is that they run there for that reason you gave. Probably because they want their child as much as you do. I think the benefit of it all, or the way to fix it all, is just to make it a pure 50-50. Which, Brendan, you were wrong on the child support. It would offset. Even in a pure 50-50, you take both parents' child support amounts, subtract it, and whoever still has a balance, pays that balance.
That's not true
That's
at all.
exactly true.
Courts will say,
They will offset it, Brendan. I've done it also.
and I've done it too. We both done it. So
let's do. I just want to. Jenna Manning has a comment. She says from a couple of minutes back, if the custodial parent is the breadwinner, does it make it okay for the non-custodial parent to pay less? So, in my opinion, Jenna, in my personal case, it was okay. I never asked for child support at all. Once I became the custodial parent, I took care of everything. Even though my children's mother did, whatever she wanted to do personally, I didn't ask for child support. So I think it's up to that parent. But for me, it was about something other than money.
the answer is it's a default to whoever has the majority custody. Default, they receive the child support. It doesn't matter if the other person makes less or more, because the presumption is the person. Well, I'm just answering that question. The presumption is wherever the child lives, the person who has custodial possession of that child is using more resources to fund that child's living expenses. So the non-custodial parent has to then partake in that, regardless of how much money they make.
Hey,
And it's a bias, of course, that for some reason men almost never ask for child support when they get custody. I've seen
wonder
it before.
why.
They almost never ask.
Because you know you ain't gonna get it.
And well, so
'Cause I don't care.
No. Whoever the custodial parent is, you automatically
No,
I'm
yes,
saying,
on
but-
procedure you would get it, but
No, you have the same rights as anybody else. I'm saying just for some reason, when men win custody of kids, we don't ask for child support. I don't know if it's a toxic.
Well, let's talk.
masculinity thing
But
or
y'all
whatever.
haven't answered the question of weaponizing children in this whole deadbeat phenomenon in terms of where the deadbeat exists in
I'm trying to
life.
answer your question. There's another entity you've neglected. There's also a phenomenon of that guy who believes that his woman and his child are a package deal. I've seen this phenomenon play out many a times where I'm from. The guy will be a A1 father when he is with that woman, but when that woman doesn't want to, reciprocate his feelings for her, then he penalizes the child by not being present. And this will be the same guy who goes and has another relationship with a woman who has 4 kids that are not his and be like the MVP father. That is also contributory.
That still didn't answer the question.
answer
You
the
just
question.
added
No, you said
another-
reasons why people are deadbeat dads.
Well, I said to speak on, but I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
I don't disagree
Okay,
with
so
anything that you
to
just said,
answer your
but y'all
question,
didn't
Brendan,
actually.
I don't think anybody's for weaponizing children, although we see it. And I think an example of that would be paying $16,000 or $30,000 for an infant in child support.
Woo! Bring it on
That
back, boy.
Weaponizes kids, and it's a disincentive to the whole process.
don't
Now,
think
I
that's
think
what
you
I-
can just bring
That's
it all
not-
back.
that's
You
not-
can
that's
do
not-
a sliding scale on child support. You can do economics attribute because a baby doesn't need $30,000, but maybe a college kid does. So you can adjust your sliding scale to make it make more sense in actual sense. But nobody's for weaponizing children.
So-
It does exist, though.
So you bring up a good point, which is going to lead us into the other part of this this story with current events is Russell and Sierra, Russell Wilson, Sierra, and well, Future, and but more importantly, Slim Thug in this particular instance, where Russell and Sierra are married. They've gone through the gauntlet time and time again about their relationship, about her child from Future. And Slim Thug made the comment that said, "Hey, look, she married for financial security. You know, this cat makes $40 million, or his net worth is $40 million. Her net worth is $20 million. So there could be an argument that $20 million isn't enough to have your own personal financial security. I think Slim Thug, at least as recorded on the internet, has $2 million net worth. So it's, you know, you might want to say, how dare you little man, speak on this when you don't even reach our level. But that's neither here nor there. But the question then becomes, you know, this whole idea of financial security, as it pertains to one, the deadbeat father, and two, the entity of child support, where women are searching for a child payday. And I think that, you know, the financial security is that part of it where, and people are going to say you need to wrap up, you don't be done with that, blah 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 blah. But as Damon said, when we talk about weaponizing child support, are certain people using child support as a means of income in lieu of all the other types of income?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
But
What?
let's
sky
go back.
appearing blue? I mean,
Let's go back to Slim for a minute because let's be clear about some other things he said. So on top of saying that it was a financial move, right? The reason he said it had to be financial is because he said you can't go from being with a cool
That's
dude.
not her type of dude.
You can't be going from a cool dude
to a
who
corny dude.
apparently Future is the cool dude to him to being with what
He
he calls.
said rappers. He didn't say necessarily cool. He said
Listen.
street people.
hold up.
And he called her current husband corny.
Right.
So
Which I
I think
agree.
that's the thing he was looking at. So he was like, well, if you're going with this corny dude, then it's got to be the money.
But he also said financial security.
Okay.
Why do you agree Russell Wilson's corny?
No, listen, because he is corny. But that's
I mean,
another.
nothing about
That
that
has
is
nothing to do with the fact.
Would you say that if he was in here?
Listen, I ain't never met a dude I ain't want to scrabble with. So that's not the.
What you're willing to do is what's going to happen.
And then I'm
What
gonna
you're
sue.
doing, the outcome is
And
two
then I'm
different
gonna
things.
sue him at the watching.
You gonna sue him, but he corny.
What is corny about Russell Wilson? The man,
Listen,
he,
man,
he
that's-
earned his keep.
this is
He's
besides-
a quarterback
this is
on
by
the
the
football
way, man.
field. He gets hit all the damn time. A higher threshold than anybody in this room, probably than Slim Thug, as far as pain.
So everybody who plays
Uses-
football is the alpha male.
no,
That's what
but he is an alpha male.
How do you know?
But because he's
You in the fan club,
He's
then?
a quarterback. He led his team.
We're running
Let me
away
make
with
my
a red
point.
herring.
Let me make my point.
Okay,
Let's
man,
focus.
Can I make my point? Because y'all cut me off from
Make
making my
your
point.
point, right?
All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the L on this because I know this is not a debate that's gonna be won in a public forum.
You're already taking
This
L's
is
on here.
This is of course, because I bet that's predominantly female viewership too.
Focus, Ryan.
But
Hold
listen,
on,
Make your point.
listen. There's certain things Slim is touching on here. I disagree with the whole financial stability argument, but there's some things he's touching on that I kind of see where he's coming from. We actually touched on this in previous debates. There's some things that Russell Wilson does. I see. You know, it's almost like my female friends, they come to me about a lot of their personal problems in their relationships. And I'm a good visionary for them. And I'm good at doing that because I can see the way men move different from them. I perceive things they don't perceive. And there's some things I can perceive in how Russell Wilson moves that he's speaking on. He's just not articulating it well. I disagree with the financial part. But there are some things, the ilk of man she has dated up until this point is consistently not been Russell Wilson.
It's also consistently been in the rap game. In musicians. So now she left musicians and found somebody who is everything she wants.
And the man is tough. He's a leader. He takes care of not only his child with Sierra,
Tough and
but
athletic are not
Sierra's
synonymous.
child. But you're correct. But he has mental toughness. He wasn't drafted as a starter. He was a third rounder and fought his way from. I
don't need his resume. I got that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So he
I know
worked
what
his
you
way
know
up.
that.
I mean, you can't call
So
him a
corny is superficial though. It's not. I'm not saying it's
Everybody can't argue at the same time. Go ahead,
Let me say
Charles.
this. Here's the thing, and I say this about celebrities all the time. We don't know these people.
Exactly.
We know,
They might be a straight
especially
throw.
Either way, though.
especially when you're the face of a NFL franchise. We know what you have to do and say to maintain that kind of position. We don't know these people. We don't know. And another thing is, Slim Thug or any man talking about what a woman finds attractive is usually wrong as hell. And I'm not saying he's hater. I like Slim, and I most of the stuff he says, I'm like, he's usually, he's pretty good dude. But I'm saying, most of the time, when you start really talking to women about what they find attractive, because a lot of us, men, I know probably 99% of men will never date a woman who they don't initially find attractive, like physically attractive. A woman might say, he was, this changed my perception about him. This made me love him. It's so many different things that man could have done to make that woman fall in love. We have no clue. So I think it's probably, and that's probably why women so many times be like, we need to be quiet about that, because we don't understand what their mind. When a woman is looking for a husband and what a man looks for in a wife, two very different things.
And I also think that Rod, vis-a-vis Slim Thug, presents a false premise, which is going to lead to a faulty conclusion in terms of you presuppose that for her, the switch from a type of man to a different type of man has to do with either monetary or whatever. It could simply be she's
learned that she doesn't want to deal with what she's dealing with.
Not even growth, but the fact that maybe I've dated the same type of person so many times. I obviously didn't work out. The 6 times with Bow Wow, with Future, with whomever else, it didn't work out. Maybe I need a different type of dude. It has nothing, and that has nothing to do with the financial stability at all. It's simply a matter of. I rejected that. It's simply a matter of I've had a certain every one of us have had a type, and every one of us has said, you know what, that type doesn't necessarily fall into what's going to be most productive for my life. Yep. And in this particular instance, it is what it is. And Tiffany Milton made a good point. She said, corny is relative. I don't understand. We have this thing about, in my opinion, anytime a good man is seen as, I can sound like what the fuck ever, but it is what it is. Anytime you have a good dude that's sitting out here doing what you talk about, the Nick Cannons of the world, you're talking about the Wayne Bradys of the world. These are successful black men who don't fit the regular mold of hardcore this or whatever. These are cats who are out there doing their own thing, making lots of money doing it, but they don't have that same type of regular black persona that you want. You call them corny for what they do. There's nothing corny substantively about Russell Wilson. He is a premier. I mean, if you would shut up, I would be done. But this is a premier football player in a championship-winning football team as the starting quarterback, making multi-million dollars. Not anywhere in that resume can you call this cat corny.
So
taking hits.
Can I rebut now?
You've been doing it all day, just being a butt. So go ahead.
So it's funny, right? It's ironic that you're using terms like fallacious premise, right? You're saying that I'm presupposing that this has this kind of character attribute because of something I see. It's all superficial. The argument that you have is premised on a presupposition as well. You don't know the opposite isn't true. This is all merely for, you said maybe, but it's all merely for discussion. When we talk about corny, we're talking about superficial attributes. I didn't say this man is can I finish? No, it's how you walk, it's how you talk. Things that are not important, but it's how you appear to people. When we use terms like corny or we use somebody who's square, we all use that terminology. It doesn't mean that it's not a judgment statement about a person.
What about him shows you that he is perceived as corny?
Exactly, and I'll get there. You assuming that's because he's a squared away guy, that he's got his life together. You're describing me.
Jesus, I just want you to just answer the question.
I think it's all in the way you look at things. It's something about that guy that some people look at and be like, he's whatever, for whatever reason. And I don't get it. Again, I say, we don't know these people. We don't know what he does behind closed doors. He did something.
But you called him corny. What exactly is corny about him? That's all.
Listen, going back to our conversation we had about Russell Wilson in the baby picture that we talked about a few episodes back, I said he was corny for that, not because he has his shit together. You're putting words in my mouth. You know that's false because I didn't say he was corny because he's a good dude. I'm a good dude by your definition. I don't think I'm corny either. I don't think I'm square. That's not what I'm predicating that assessment on. It's the fact that he says things, he moves a certain way, and he does things I feel is square. It's corny, period. And it's all superficial. It doesn't really matter. But all judgment statements like that are superficial. Even yours, and yours too. So why is mine less valid because I take a different position from y'all? Why I'm getting all this heat?
Because you're both corny and square. I think you're corny and square.
Oh yeah, well see, he's blind.
All right, so on the other side of this whole Sierra Russell debate is you go back to the future part of this because this is good fodder for discussion. The future part of this, where and you brought it up with the whole picture. We talked about that in I don't know, like episode 1 or 2, this old naked baby picture. But the co-parenting of a mixed family. This isn't a nuclear family or the traditional nuclear family where this is the biological dad, biological mom. This is stepdad and mom raising the kid together. How hard is it? And some of you, I know Charles in particular, has been in a relationship where he has had to intermingle children that weren't yours within the family unit. How hard is it to co-parent as a step parent with that natural born parent, other parent?
I think it depends. It depends on the dynamic of the people involved. So in my case, I was very lucky. My stepson's natural, his biological father and I were cool. We got along right off the bat. We talked to each other. We still talk to each other to this day, and he's a grown man now. So it depends on the people involved. We were all worried about the kids growing up and being good. So when it was time to visit, if he wanted to come to the house or the kid would go to his house, there were times when my children, who are not his biological children, would join their brother. I never allowed them to say stepbrother, right? That was their brother. So if he was going to his dad's house, sometimes his brothers wanted to go with him. So it's all about the people that are involved. If you're mature enough now, also, there was no animosity between the mother and the father. So it was easy for me to just shake the man's hand. He shook my hand. I don't want her. She doesn't want me. We just want to raise this child. So in the case of future, I don't know if they have the same situation because there's probably some animosity there.
Okay. But one of the things that I've seen, because I grew up where I had a stepfather come into the role of a father. He was not a good stepfather. I mean, he came in, he did what he wanted to do, he disciplined the way he wanted to do, and that discipline was not, for all intents and purposes, what one would want their child to have to go through. And it's a dangerous thing that the game that you play in terms of managing the parental aspect of dealing with a co-parenting situation in terms of discipline, how that child is supposed to perceive you, how you want that child to perceive you, because the people have said, well, on one end, we use the Russell thing as a benchmark, but hey, now this kid has two fathers. Some will say, well, no, he only has one father and he's got this other stepfather. Russell should know his lane. What should that lane really look like other than to love that child as if they were your own?
That's the only lane, man. That's the only lane.
That's the only lane.
If I'm a father, so I have a son and I deal with this, right? So the only way you're going to prevent your child being in a situation that you don't want to, if you go get your child and you spend time with them too. But that's the thing. He's in that man's house. So the only thing you can hope for is that Sierra has done a good job of evaluating him in the relationship, the type of father figure he's going to be, and hope the best for that situation. Try to develop a relationship with that man and talk about your principles versus his principles and try to get aligned as best as possible. But there's nothing you're going to be able to do about that but stay involved in your child's life.
Do you find that it's a struggle to not be threatened by another man that comes in and plays that role? I mean, how hard is it, like, if you heard your kid say, oh, that's also daddy. He's been around this cat for 5 years now. He calls another man daddy. I know a lot of moms say, I'm the only mama. Is that the saying that holds true? I mean, men have a certain sense of ownership of something, and we have more pride than women because we have a lot more ego to contend with.
I don't think so. For me, I feel like I do my job as a father. I support my son in all ways. So if he's around somebody else that much time, naturally he's going to build that bond with the other man, right? So I don't think you should be prideful about that. I think you should embrace that. I think you should embrace that and explain what the situation is. Me and his mom didn't work out, so she's not going to stay single forever. I'm not going to stay single forever. So you have to embrace those relationships and just guide your child through them and make them understand that you know, you're not a stepchild because you don't want somebody to treat your child like a stepchild. You want them to treat your child like it is their child. So if that's what you're gonna speak, then you're probably speaking what you don't want to happen into existence.
Yeah.
I don't think for any well-adjusted father this is a controversy. I think we mostly agree on this. I don't really.
You know who you are as a
Pretty
father.
much.
You know that's your biological child, but don't create a boundary between your child and the household that he's gonna be in. How much of a time. Don't create that for your child. Let the child be embraced by the other person.
Yeah. And don't. And this might be a controversial statement because a lot of parents do this. That's your child, but your child is not a possession. He's not a car or a house. He is a living, breathing human being who's going to have to learn. He's going to have a personality. He's going to make connections with people. He's going to go out and love people. So it doesn't just have to be, that's my son, so I have to be this XYZ. Be a father to him. But if he has other people, like growing up, right? My dad is, I'll say, one of the greatest dads ever. But I have an uncle. My uncle was the one who, got me involved in sports, and because he loved that kind of thing. So I look at him just as I look at my dad as somebody I really love in my life. So you can have those attachments and those influences without it being, a negative to your parent.
How hard do you guys think it is then, if you're not the custodial parent, the non-custodial parent, how hard is it for you to maintain the relationship that you want with your child when you don't have that child living with you? I mean, to me, it seems like it's an exponential burden because on one hand, let's assume this is a mom and dad where mom has the majority possessory right. Child is going to automatically be with that mom 60 to 70% of the time. That means that they go to sleep with them most nights. They're the ones taking them to school. They're the ones who, when they're sick, going straight to mom at that point. Dad tends to be the one that, because I only have a limited amount of time, I have to be the fun parent with that kid, or I have to maximize whatever it is. Does that dynamic change your ability to function as the parent that you want to be with your child?
I think it can change it a bit, but it forces you to really. It forces you to dig deep and look at how you want to live. Luckily, some parents, I was really lucky because even when my ex and I were at our worst with each other, she never stopped me from, if I wanted to see my kids every day, I could come by every day. So that was good. But I think it's dealing with the parent, dealing with that other parent, and just sitting down like adults and saying, listen, no matter what we've been through, we want to raise these kids the right way. I want to spend time, you want to spend time, and just coming up with something that works for both of you. I think if, clearly in some cases you don't want that, but I think if two people are really focused on what matters and that's their kid, they can come up with something that works where everybody is, I'm going
to tell you, I can speak from the other side of that because mine was exactly the opposite of his, but if you face a situation like mine was where you do have to combat a parent, then you're gonna have to fight like hell, man. You're gonna have to go through some shit. You're gonna have to get iPads and you're gonna have to be creative with how you're gonna engage with your child. And when you have a parent that's on the other side who they're not being as supportive as you would want them to be, then it's gonna be a battle. But at the end of the day, if you feel that strongly about your child, you're gonna have to find a way.
never give up.
Well, Andrew Simpson asked the question, how can I get on this show next week? Andrew, first of all, I want to thank you for tuning in with us and being such a avid supporter. One thing that we would like to do is make sure that we are able to get the opinions of our viewers. We do that by allowing you guys to give us video submissions in questions and comments and concerns. You can do that, either upload a video of what you want us to talk about. We'll put it on the Facebook page. We also have a feature that we're going to be rolling out on the website. The website is www.gentspodcast.com. Did I say it right? whew, boys, it's tough every week to get that. But we'll have a video submission for you guys to be able to put your comments on there. Same way we do our blogs, and we'll also be doing some video blogs as well. But if you also want to be a guest on the show, tell us why you would be a valuable asset to the show for that week, and we'll see what we can do on getting you on, because we want to make sure that our viewers have the opportunity, the unique opportunity to join us from time to time. This week in our Black Magic, we got some Black Girl Magic yet again coming up. These girls are really out here doing it, man. First and foremost, we have Marina Robinson Snowden, a 30-year-old Miami native who has just become the first black woman to earn a nuclear engineering PhD from MIT. There are only 2% of women in that particular field, and as the first African-American woman to do it, my God, what an accomplishment. Hats off to you, Miss Snowden. Quentin, you got some competition.
She better come ready, I'm tell you that. She coming for me, she better come ready.
And we also have Abby Dion. She is the first black woman to own an indoor rock climbing gym in the U.S. Hats off to you. She's got Coral Cliffs Climbing Gym in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I love the fact that, one, black people are showing up and showing out on a daily and weekly basis, and we don't do enough to highlight them. And most importantly, the women who are the backbone of our society don't get enough recognition. So shout out to you, black girls, Black Girl Magic. Love what you're doing. That being said, as we wrap up the show, we want to say again, thank you to everybody who's been watching, tuning in. We see your comments. We are going to expound on them vis-a-vis our blogs that we're going to be doing. Every week we put out blogs, and I hope you guys, as you see those blogs, comment on them, share this page. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. If you go to our website, www.gentspodcast.com, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. We need as many subscriptions as possible so we can make it a dedicated channel. We also have an Instagram, which is Charles. What's the Instagram?
At Gents Podcast.
At Gents Podcast. We have. Is that it?
That's not it at all.
Okay.
Well, why don't we?
Can we get a board
They
made?
do not have a dedicated YouTube address yet, so they just need to go and search intelligence.
Can we just get a board printed up?
So that was our Black Girl Magic producer, because she keeps us in line and tells us what we can and can't do every single day. But yeah, hope you've had a great time watching us today. This is Intelligence, bringing you knowledge with the power to change. We will see you next Monday. Bye-bye.